Oh, that was a cool story, eh? So I really admire Jenna because she was afraid. Her back was hurting really bad. She didn't know what was happening, but she still trusted God. And they didn't know if they were going to get a plane to take them home, but she still trusted God, and God helped her. He helped her pull through. You know what it reminds me of? The descendants of Korah. Does it remind you guys of that? Yeah. Well, the descendants of Korah were a band from 3,000 years ago. Kind of like this band here, except they didn't have electricity. And those guys called themselves the descendants of Korah too. But these guys were from 3,000 years ago, and they wrote a song, and it's in the Bible. We don't have the music anymore, but we still have the words. And the words to the song go like this. God is our refuge and strength. Can you guys say that with me? God is our refuge and strength. Let's say it one more time because we're going to say it again after. God is our refuge and strength. He's always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and the mountains crumble into the sea. Even then, we won't be afraid. Let the oceans roar and foam. Let the mountains tremble as the waters surge, because God is our refuge and strength. So these guys, they were in an earthquake. They saw an earthquake before, but they said, we won't be afraid when an earthquake comes. Have you guys ever been in an earthquake before? No? No? Yes. Okay. Well, I hope that you never have to be in one. I was in an earthquake once. 10 years ago. I want to tell you guys about it. I was with my friends, and it was nighttime. We were at a buddy's place, and we were playing cards. You guys ever play cards? Yeah. And whenever I play cards, I win all the time. So I was playing with these guys, and I was winning, and I was beating them, and I was getting so tired of beating them over and over again. And there was a chandelier above the table. Do you guys know what a chandelier is?
Yeah.
What's a chandelier?
No. It's a light.
A light. It's a light that swings from the roof. Maybe you have one in your house. And so there was a chandelier, and we're playing cards, and the light from the chandelier was down, showing that I was winning. And all of a sudden, the chandelier started to shake back and forth like this. And we're looking up, and we're like, what in the world is going on? And we thought maybe there's like an angel up there that's pushing it back and forth. But then all of a sudden, the ground started to shake too. So it was shaking, and it was weird. It was like when you get in an elevator. You been in an elevator?
Yes.
Yeah, you get in there and you press the down button, and nothing's moving, but all of a sudden you feel like you're moving. That's kind of like what it was like. So the ground was moving, the chandelier was shaking, and all of a sudden, crack! There was a crack in the floor, and the floor opened up, and there was a big dark pit. And I looked down into it, and I seen there was lava, hot red. Have you guys seen lava before? There was lava down in there, and there was smoke coming out. And I heard this voice from the pit that said, now you will pay. Actually, that didn't happen. But there was an earthquake, and the chandelier was shaking, and the ground was moving. And then after 10 minutes, the earthquake stopped. It was over. It was just a puny, puny little earthquake. But maybe you guys have seen pictures of big earthquakes before. Have you seen on TV? Yeah, pictures. I'm going to show you some pictures of a big earthquake that was in Indonesia. There, that's what happened. The ground shook, and that building almost fell right over. Here's another picture here. Some girls walking through. Her house was totally flattened. Here's one more picture here. There was a mall that got totally wrecked. So what happened was the earthquake was 7.5 on the Richter scale. You guys know what that is? Yeah. That means that it was thousands of times stronger than the earthquake that I was in. I'll take some questions after. And so it was shaking so hard that the mountains actually started to fall. So there was like trees and rocks and mud, and the sides of the mountains came down, and some people were buried underneath all that rubble. So it was terrible. And then the earthquake wasn't just on the land, because Indonesia is an island. And so there's water, and the earthquake was underneath the water as well on the ocean floor. And that started a huge wave that came and crashed into the land. So that's what happened when the tidal wave, the tsunami. Anybody know what a tsunami is?
Yes.
What's a tsunami?
It's a kind of a big wave that can take on anything.
A huge wave that could take on anything. It's like the size of houses. That's how big the wave was.
It's like what happens when an earthquake, it's like when it's shaking or something, it just, or like an asteroid just like forms.
That's right. From the earthquake, it forms a huge wave, and it came in, and it wrecked shopping malls, and it wrecked houses, and it crashed into churches like this one, and many people were killed. So it was a terrible, terrible, terrible day. So imagine that you were there. Imagine that you were there in Indonesia when that earthquake happened. Okay, so the ground's shaking, and you can see that there's cracks forming, and then you look up and you see the mountains, and they're actually even falling down. And then you look out onto the water and you see a tidal wave that's the size of this church coming in. Do you think that you would be afraid?
Yes.
Yeah, who wouldn't be afraid? Somebody said they wouldn't be afraid. So most people would be afraid. I would be afraid. I would be trembling. You would be what?
Super scared.
Super scared. Thank you for being so honest. Wow. Super scared. So, but the sons of Korah, they were in an earthquake too, right? We just read about it. They said, when the earthquake comes, we won't be afraid. Why did they say they wouldn't be afraid when the earthquake comes? Because they trusted God, that's great. And because God is our refuge and strength. And He's always ready to help in times of trouble. So even when the earthquake's coming, we can say, God, help. And God will help us. And when the tidal wave is coming in, we can say, God, help. And God will help us. So God is always ready to help, even when there's things like earthquakes and tidal waves or other things that make us afraid. What else makes you guys afraid? Spiders. Those are scary. Wolves. Tornadoes. Those can make us afraid.
I'm scared of mountains falling down.
Mountains falling down. That sounds very scary. What else? Walmart? Wildfires. And Walmart makes me afraid. Big corporation. Avalanches. Tarantulas. Snakes. Slugs. Okay. Slides.
No, floods.
Floods. Okay, yeah, all that stuff. What about, is there anything that happens in your house that ever makes you afraid? What? Spiders, already got that. Your dad, sometimes he can be scary. All those things. Yeah, one more, just last one.
I'm scared of my bunny, that my bunny may get sick.
Your bunny, yeah, he's scary as well. Yeah, he's scary bunny. Okay, you know what? I'm going to tell you about a guy that was there in the earthquake, and he wasn't actually afraid. His name is Rikaseta Mafela. Here's a picture of him here. He's the guy on the right-hand side with the aviator sunglasses. He looks kind of cool. What do you think he's doing right there? He's flying. He's flying a jet. That's what he is. He's a jet airline pilot, and that's the plane that he flies. And he was flying into Indonesia on the day of the earthquake. So the earthquake had not happened yet, and he flew in and he landed his plane on the runway, and all the passengers, all the people inside got out, and then other passengers came on board, and they were sitting there on the runway waiting to take off, but they had a long time to wait, because sometimes you have a long time to wait when you get on a plane. But while he was sitting there, Rikaseta Mafela, can you say his name? Sounds kind of like pasta, right? So Rikaseta Mafela was sitting in the plane, and all of a sudden he heard God's voice saying, "Take off quick, go fast, something bad's going to happen." And he was like, huh. And he's like, "Is that God?" And he wasn't sure, but he thought, maybe I should obey because I think God spoke to me. So he radioed to the control tower. Do you guys know what a control tower is? Here's a picture of a control tower here. So that's on the side of the runways at the airports, and there's guys in control towers that tell planes when they can land and when they can take off. And so there was this guy in the control tower whose name is Antonios Agos. That's him right there. So he was in the control tower that day when Rikaseta called him up and said, "Can I leave early?" And he said, "Yep, you can go. You can go 3 minutes early." And so Rikaseta fired up his engines and he took off, and he left with the people. And you know what happened 3 minutes later? The earthquake hit. So they were up flying in the airplane, and down below, the earthquake hit, and the runway, they said, the earthquake was so strong that it made the runway move like waves. So it was like, even though it was like a street, it was moving like waves on the water. And it cracked, and it broke, and there was big cracks that they said were 2 meters wide on the runway. You know how big that is?
That's like
Yeah, at least that big. About that big. That's 2 meters wide. That's how big the cracks on the runway were. So, if Ricasetta had left 3 minutes later, his plane would have hit those cracks and crashed. And a lot of people would have got hurt. But instead, because he heard God's voice and he listened, he was able to take off and be saved. So now, Ricasetta knows that he doesn't ever have to be afraid because God is our refuge and strength, right? He's always ready to help. And that was great for him. That was great for Ricasetta. But you know what happened to Antonius? He didn't make it out. His control tower actually crumbled and fell, and he died in it. So he stayed in his control tower. Even when the earthquake was starting to come, he wanted to make sure as many planes as possible could get off the runway and get away. So he stayed there until his control tower came down and he died. So the other people were saved in the plane, but Antonius didn't make it out. You know who he reminds me of?
Jesus.
God and Jesus. That's right. He reminds me of Jesus. Because you know, Jesus actually sits in a control tower as well. He sits in a control tower that's way above the world and way above the universe, and he's in control of everything. So he's in control of the earthquakes. He's in control of the tsunamis and the tidal waves. He's in control of everything. But one day, long ago, he stepped out of his control tower and he came down to the earth, and he actually died for us. So just like Antonius died in the control tower, Jesus died for us on the cross so that we could get away and be saved. Does that make sense? Yeah, that makes sense. So even though we've done some bad stuff, Jesus died for all the bad stuff we've done so that we could be free and we could be saved. So, when you're afraid, what will you remember? God is our refuge and strength, and He's always ready to help in times of trouble. And you can know that because Jesus died for you. So you don't have to be afraid. If there's earthquakes, you don't have to be afraid of spiders. You don't have to be afraid if you have to go to a new school, or if there's some kids that are being mean to you and you're scared of them. You can pray to God and say, God, help. I need you to be my refuge and my strength. Okay? Thanks so much for listening, guys.